Basically, I wrote a video about the Rolex bubble not being a bubble, but it's actually price inflation about 12 months ago, but I never made a video. 12 months later, we're actually starting to see inflation happening everywhere. So I thought I would actually make a video as a follow-up, but it's just me redoing my original video. I hope that makes sense. So 12 months ago, there was lots of videos on YouTube around the subject of, are we in a Rolex price bubble? My views were, I doubt we're in a Rolex bubble, but instead this new pricing was going to be permanent. Lo and behold, 12 months later, we've got energy crisis, we've got material shortages and manufacturing constraints, and I think these were all basically excuses, because I do think what we're seeing is a permanent inflation in prices. And once that happens, it's hard to go backwards. So in this video, I want to cover two things. I want to talk about what this means for all watch brands and what this means for Rolex. When Rolex makes a move, it's probably good to assume that the whole watch world will move with it. So with that said, let's look at a view of my understanding of watch prices a couple of years ago versus where I think watch prices are going to be staying for the foreseeable future. So a few years ago, you would probably be able to go to a retail store, an authorized dealer, to buy a Rolex between 5k and 10k for sports watches. And then you'd probably go to an Omega store or an Omega authorized dealer and see Omega watches, sports watches, between 3 and 6k. And you'd probably be able to haggle a discount, which was a famous thing you could do a few years ago, but now you probably couldn't. And with Tudor, you probably see Tudor in the 2k plus range. With Oris, you could buy any Oris for under 2k at retail. So Oris Aquises were famously 1,500, and the Oris 65 divers were 1,200, and a special edition might set you back 1,700. And in Seiko watches, whether it's the Presage range or whether it's other Seiko watches, you'd probably see them under £500 or $500. So to me, this is the view I remember a couple of years ago, between 2015 to 2019. So today, this landscape looks very, very different. After 18 months, this is how things look. So Rolex seems to be moving from its 5 to 10k range for sports watches and moving on towards the 10k to 10k plus range. My prediction is they want to start moving into Patek Philippe's pricing and compete with Patek directly. Next, Omega. Omega's moving into the 6k plus range, or from 6k to 14 plus k, depending on the type of model you're looking at. You can see they're using the 3-2-1 movement to push the pricing up, and the use of precious metals for their sports watches to elevate the price. They've also come out with some halo products to push up the price also, like the Omega Speedmaster Canopus. Tudor, which was a 2k plus watch brand, is now moving into the 3k plus range. They are also using precious metal watches to push their prices higher, as you can see with the gold Black Bay 58, and the standard pricing for their standard models are in the high 2000s and £3,000 range or $3,000 plus range. So as you can see, Tudor is moving into what probably was Rolex's old pricing from years ago. Next is Oris. Oris used to be in the under £2,000 range in terms of prices, and when you look at some of their models on their website, you'll still see some models with the under £2,000 pricing. But as you can see, some of their newer models are moving into the 3K plus price bracket. So they've already released their new big crown pointer date, which is in the mid 2000s, but they have started to release models using the 400 caliber, which is something they're using to push up the prices of their watches to the 3K and above pricing range. You'll also see this with new models such as the Pro Pilot X, which they're using as a halo watch to move into the 3K plus range. Seiko's were the value brand. They were the value kings. Now we're seeing Seiko move from under 500 for a watch and breaking through the 1,000 barrier for some of their watches. So Seiko are doing a few things here. They're using sub-brands such as Seiko Prospex and Seiko Presage to push up the prices of their watches. Also, they're using technology from Grand Seiko to boost the price of their non-Grand Seiko watches. And now you're seeing Seiko watches that are not Grand Seiko in the 3K plus range. They're also introducing new dials and new finishing to push up their pricing. But you can still find value in Seiko if you look for Seiko 5 watches. So, what occupies the old Seiko pricing of under 500 and maybe the 1K space? You're starting to see a rise in micro brands, and you're seeing this reflected in watch blogs also. We've seen impressive watches from Baltic. You're starting to see more watches from Yema. And there are lots of other micro brands and interesting smaller brands that are occupying that space. So again, this highlights the reason why I do think this pricing bubble seen in Rolex will stay. So I thought I'd get into how this first started. Let's look at the first wave. Pre-owned went crazy, starting with Rolex. Watches became unobtainable. Then this started to spread to other watches. So when people couldn't get Daytonas, they instead moved to Nautilus and then overseas, or Vacheron overseas, and then to Omega Speedmaster models. Then there was wave 2. Seiko started to move their price up, Spring Drive being introduced into their non-Grand Seiko watches. Wave 3. All of the other watch brands that we know of started to release a mixture of great watches and special edition watches. Think about Breitling, think about Longines, think about Oris. They all started creating amazing watches that all commanded a higher price. As I mentioned, the 400 caliber pushed up the price of the Aquis. Then they released the special Sun Wukong Artist Edition watch, which is 20K. Now, you've probably heard me use the term halo watch, and I'm probably not using the term in the correct way, but my view of a halo watch is a watch that holds the ambitions of a watch company. And with the Oris Aquis Sun Wukong Artist Edition with Kanisi dial at £20,000 or $20,000+, that looks like it holds the ambition of where Oris sees itself. It uses a halo watch to push up the expectations and the actual pricing of its watches. I personally think a lot of other brands are actually using the strategy that Oris is using to actually push up their prices of their watches also. Wave 4. Now, to complete this transition, you need other brands to fill in the vacant spaces left by the brands that are moving up in price. When this happens, that cements the pricing structure move. So with the micro brands and other brands now filling those old pricing spaces, you'll now see a permanent pricing structure throughout watch brands. If there wasn't any other brands filling up this space, it's quite possible that prices could go up and down drastically. So what does this mean for Rolex? The days of Rolex being a 5K sports watch brand are long gone. Now, I know I mentioned that I didn't want to include pre-owned prices when making some of these assumptions, but they both work in tandem, retail and pre-owned. So because pre-owned is so ridiculous and so sky high, it helps retail keep their prices at a certain level. So if there was no demand in the pre-owned, then you would actually see retail prices fall to catch demand and generate demand. But because there's high demand in pre-owned, then retail prices can stay up because they don't need to adjust their pricing. So it's because of this, I feel this is not a bubble. Beware of videos predicting the price bubble, and it's for these reasons you should beware in expecting a price correction. And speaking of price corrections, could prices fall, say 10%, based on a huge economic crash? Of course, but this is based on today's pricing. You will never see a correction, I believe, that would bring it back down to prices we remember from 4 years ago. That would mean a 50% correction, and I just don't see that happening. I wanted to say this because there are a lot of Rolex bubble videos. There might be an expectation that if I just wait, I'll have a chance. But I think this is going to be permanent. So because of this, I will be expanding my interest beyond the brands that I just mentioned. I'm not interested in spending lots of money on a watch. I do appreciate nice watches, but I do believe in value and affordability. And for me, watches are a fun, interesting hobby and not taking the prices and the watches so seriously.